The crack of his palm across her face echoed through the hall, and 300 of the most dangerous people on the coast went completely silent. Kang Tae-jun stood there breathing hard, wine still dripping down his ruined white suit, certain he had just put some nameless woman in her place. He sneered down at her plain dress, her flat shoes, the cheap-looking bag at her side, and his lip curled with disgust. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he spat, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Women like you should be grateful I don't have you thrown out like the trash you are. Clean my suit. Now. Beg, and maybe I'll let you keep your job." But she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't even flinch. She simply turned her cheek back to face him, slow and calm, with a faint smile playing at the corner of her mouth, the kind of smile that should have warned him. And just when he thought he had won, just as he opened his mouth to insult her again, her hand shot out. In the space of a single breath, the most feared man at that summit was on the cold marble floor, gasping, his arm twisted at an angle that promised to snap. Then the laughter started, first one family, then another, until the entire hall was roaring at the great Kang Tae-jun, brought down by a woman whose name he didn't even know. She leaned over his ear and whispered 6 words that drained every drop of color from his face. Because the quiet woman he'd just humiliated wasn't a nobody. She was the one name even he had been warned never to cross. Welcome to Afro-Han Tales, besties. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories like this. Now let's get right into it. To understand how the proudest man on the coast ended up on his back in front of 300 enemies, you have to go back. Not far. Just 40 minutes. 40 minutes before that slap, the cliffside estate had been glowing like something out of a dream, all golden light and black water crashing far below the windows, and Kang Tae-jun had walked through its great doors like a man who already owned the place. He came with 8 men at his back and a smile that never reached his eyes. The crowd parted for him the way water parts for a blade. Servers froze mid-step. Conversations died in throats. Somewhere, a string quartet kept playing, but even the music seemed to lower itself, as though the instruments themselves knew better than to be loud in his presence. This was the effect Tae-jun had spent his entire life cultivating, and he wore it like a second skin. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, the dark ink of old tattoos crawling up the side of his neck and across the backs of his hands, and when he moved, the air in the room seemed to move with him. "Look at them," he murmured to the man beside him, a sharp-faced lieutenant named Ji-hoon. "They flinch before I even speak. This is what respect looks like." "This is what fear looks like," Ji-hoon corrected quietly. "There is a difference, boss." Tae-jun laughed, low and pleased. "On this coast, there is no difference. They are the same thing wearing different clothes." He had come a long way to be here, 3,000 miles, across an ocean, into a territory his family had circled for years, but never owned. The summit was supposed to be the night he changed that. The families of the coast had gathered under truce, a fragile, expensive peace negotiated over months, to carve up the shipping lanes, the ports, the quiet routes that moved more wealth in a week than most countries saw in a year. And Tae-jun had crossed that ocean for one reason: to take the largest share, to take the lion's portion that had belonged, for as long as anyone could remember, to a single rival empire. An empire run by someone called the Lioness. He had heard the name 100 times, whispered in boardrooms, spoken with a strange, hushed reverence by men who did not show reverence to anyone. The Lioness controlled the southern ports, the inland routes, half the city's quiet money, and a network of loyal hands so deep that no one had ever managed to map it. But Tae-jun had never seen a photograph, No one had. In all his research, in all his preparation, the most powerful figure on the coast was nothing but a name and a rumor and a question mark. A ghost, he had called her, back in Seoul when his father warned him. I am crossing an ocean to negotiate with a ghost. Do not underestimate ghosts, his father had said. The ones you cannot see are the ones that kill you. But Tae-jun had never learned how to be afraid of things he could not see. It was, his father often said, the great flaw running through him like a crack through marble. Beautiful and waiting to break. 40 minutes before the slap, while Tae-jun was busy collecting the fear of strangers like a tax, a woman in a plain charcoal dress slipped through the side entrance of the estate without a single head turning. She wore flat shoes that made no sound. Her hair was pulled back simply. No jewels, no statement. The bag at her side was worn soft at the corners from years of use. She looked, to anyone who glanced at her, like an assistant, a planner, perhaps someone hired to keep the evening running smoothly. This was exactly what she wanted them to think. Her name was Deborah, and she had built the habit of being underestimated into the single sharpest weapon she owned. She had learned long ago that the moment people decided you were nothing, they stopped watching you. And the moment they stopped watching you, you could walk anywhere, hear anything, become the most dangerous person in any room. Her own people called her the Lioness. Her enemies called her the Lioness. But she had not survived this long by ever once looking like a lioness when she walked through a door. He's here, murmured the only woman standing close to her, a tall, severe figure named Nena, who served as Deborah's right hand. Came in 20 minutes ago. Loud. 8 men. He's been telling people he'll have the southern ports signed over to him before midnight. Deborah took a slow glass of water from a passing tray and did not drink it. Has he now? He doesn't know what you look like. A faint, dangerous amusement touched Nene's mouth. He's been describing you to people. Says he's looking forward to meeting the famous lioness. He's standing 12 feet from you right now. Deborah's eyes moved, unhurried, across the room, past the families and the rivals and the careful enemies, and landed on the tall Korean man holding court near the center of the hall, laughing at something, drawing eyes the way a fire draws moths. Him, she said softly. It was not a question. Him. She studied him for a long, quiet moment. The arrogance of him, the way he occupied space as if the space were grateful to be occupied. She had met 100 men like him over the years, and she had buried a fair number of them, and she felt the old familiar tiredness settle over her like dust. He thinks loudness is power, she said. He thinks the whole room belongs to him, because no one has told him it doesn't. You want me to introduce you? No, a small smile. Let him find out the hard way. Men like that never learn anything that's handed to them gently. She had no way of knowing, in that moment, just how hard the way was about to become. And neither did he. The collision happened the way disasters always do, out of nothing, out of an instant. A young server, balancing a tray of red wine, turned to avoid a guest stepping back into his path. His shoulder clipped another server. The tray tilted, and a single full glass of deep red wine arced out into the air and emptied itself down the front of Kang Tae-jun's pristine white suit. For one breath, the world stopped. The stain bloomed across the white fabric like a wound. Tae-jun looked down at it slowly, and the laughter drained out of his face, and something cold and ugly took its place. The young server had already vanished into the crowd in terror. And when Tae-jun's head snapped up, his eyes searching for someone to blame, the nearest person to him, close enough, plain enough, quiet enough, was a woman in a charcoal dress. Deborah. You, he said. It wasn't, she began, calm, almost kind. He didn't let her finish. In his world, explanations from people beneath him were noise, and noise was to be silenced. He moved before thought, fueled by humiliation and a lifetime of never once being told no. And the crack of his palm across her face rang through the hall like a gunshot. 300 of the most dangerous people on the coast went silent. And then he sneered and leaned in and began to insult her, telling her we was trash, telling her to beg, telling her to clean his suit. And the more he spoke, the more the silence around them changed. Because the people in that room knew something Kang Tae-jun did not. They knew whose face he had just struck. And they were watching the proudest man on the coast walk, smiling, off the edge of a cliff he could not see. Deborah did not cry. She turned her cheek slowly back to face him, and she smiled. What happened next happened so fast that most of the people who witnessed it would spend years afterward arguing about exactly how she had done it. One moment Tae-jun was standing over her, mid-insult, certain of his victory. The next, her hand had closed around his wrist. Her body had pivoted with a grace that looked almost lazy, and the most feared man at the summit was airborne. And then he was not airborne. He was on the cold marble floor, flat on his back. The air punched out of his lungs, his arm twisted up behind him at an angle that whispered of breaking. His men lunged forward. Deborah did not even look at them. She simply tightened her grip a fraction, and Tae-jun made a sound. Small, involuntary, humiliating. And the men froze, because they understood that one more inch of pressure and their boss's arm would snap like dry wood. And then the laughter started. It began with one family near the back, a single bark of disbelieving laughter. And then it spread, family to family, table to table, until the entire glittering hall was roaring with it. 300 of the coast's most dangerous people laughing at the great Kang Tae-jun, who had crossed an ocean to take their territory and was now pinned to the floor by a woman in flat shoes. The sound of it was worse than any wound. It rolled over him in waves. He could feel the heat of his own shame crawling up his neck, hotter than the wine, hotter than the slap, and there was nothing in the world he could do to stop it. Deborah leaned down close to his ear, and she whispered 8 words. "I heard you were looking for me. I'm here." The color drained from his face. She released him then, stepping back as easily as if she had done nothing more than set down a glass, and she looked out over the laughing room with the calm of a woman who had owned it her entire life. Then she turned and walked toward the great doors, and the crowd parted for her, not out of fear of a name now, but out of something far deeper, out of having watched the name become real. Tae-jun pushed himself up off the floor, his suit ruined, his arm aching, his pride in pieces at his feet. He stared at the doors swinging shut behind her, and for the first time in his entire life, Kang Tae-jun understood that he had made a terrible, terrible mistake. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the dark of his borrowed penthouse high above the city. The lights of the harbor spread out below him like scattered coins, and he replayed it again and again. The laughter, the whisper, the 6 words. "You're looking for me. I'm her." He had crossed an ocean to negotiate from a position of strength, and within an hour of arriving, he had not only failed, he had handed every rival on the coast the single most useful weapon they could ever have against him. A story they would tell for years. The story of the night a woman put him on his back. "It can be managed," Ji-hoon said carefully, standing near the window. He had been Tae-jun's man for 11 years and had never once seen him like this. "We control the narrative. We say it was a misunderstanding. We say nothing." Tae-jun's voice was flat and cold and terrible. "There are 300 witnesses. You cannot bury 300 witnesses. He turned from the glass slowly. Find her. Everything. Where she sleeps, what she eats, who she loves, who she owes. I want her whole life on this table by morning, and then I am going to take it apart, piece by piece, until she is the one on the floor, until she is the one they laugh at, until she understands what it costs to humiliate me. Boss, Ji-hoon hesitated, and the hesitation itself was unusual enough that Tae-jun noticed it. There's something you should know first, about who she is. I know who she is. She is a woman who got lucky once. She will not get lucky twice. That's the thing. Ji-hoon set a thin folder down on the table between them, and his face, when he looked up, was the face of a man delivering bad news to someone he was afraid of. She didn't get lucky. Boss, she's the lioness. The woman you slapped is the lioness. The same empire you crossed the ocean to take. You hit her. You called her trash and told her to clean your suit. And she is the most powerful person on this entire coast. The room went very still. Tae-jun stared down at the folder. He did not open it. He didn't have to. Some part of him had known the instant she whispered those 8 words into his ear. But hearing it said aloud, plainly in his lieutenant's careful voice, made it real in a way the whisper had not. He had not merely humiliated some nameless woman in front of his rivals. He had assaulted the single most dangerous figure on the coast, the very person he had come to do business with. And he had done it in front of every family that mattered. This was the second blow, and somehow it was worse than the first. The slap had cost him his pride. This cost him his footing. Because there was no negotiation now. There was no clever entrance to make, no deal to broker, no territory to take through charm and pressure. He had walked into her house and struck her across the face. Whatever advantage his name had carried across that ocean was gone, drowned in red wine, lying on a marble floor. For a long moment, Tae-jun said nothing. And then, slowly, something hardened in him, the crack in the marble pulling tight, the flaw becoming, for a moment, a strength. Then she is more dangerous than I thought, he said quietly. And taking her down will mean more than I thought. He picked up the folder at last. Good. I have never wanted anything that was easy. Ji-hoon watched his boss's eyes move over the pages, and he felt the temperature in the room drop, and he understood that a war had just begun. A war between 2 empires, lit by a single careless hand. What he did not understand yet, what none of them understood yet, was that Tae-jun was about to learn the same lesson 300 people had watched him learn that night, and he was going to have to learn it again and again and again, until it finally broke something open in him. Meanwhile, across the city, in a mansion that did not announce itself, Deborah sat alone with a glass of red wine she had barely touched. The house was large but quiet, built more for stillness than for show. No gold, no statements, nothing that begged to be noticed, which was, of course, the most expensive thing of all. She sat by the tall windows with the lights low, turning the events of the summit over in her mind, the way a jeweler turns a stone, looking for the flaw, looking for the cut. She felt no triumph. That surprised people who didn't know her. They expected the lioness to gloat, to savor having put the great Kang Tae-jun on his back in front of 300 enemies. But Deborah had stopped finding pleasure in winning a long time ago. Winning was simply what she did, the way breathing was what she did. What interested her was the man himself. The arrogance, yes, but also the speed with which the arrogance had cracked, the flash of something almost human in his eyes the moment he understood. She had not been born into power. That was the thing the rivals who feared her never quite grasped. She had come from nothing, from less than nothing, and she had clawed her way up through rooms that were not built for women who looked like her. through men who underestimated her exactly the way Tai-Jun had, one after another, year after year. And somewhere along that long, brutal climb, she had made herself a quiet promise that she would never become the thing she had to fight, that no matter how high she rose, she would remember the floor. She kept her voice low because she had learned that the loudest person in any room was almost always the most frightened. She dressed plainly because she had nothing left to prove to anyone but herself. And she stayed humble, truly humble, because she had seen what pride did to powerful people. She had watched it that very night, dripping red down a white suit. "You should be happy," Nene had said to her on the drive home. "You won." Deborah had only smiled faintly at the window. "No one wins at a thing like that," she had said. "Some people just lose more slowly than others." Now, in the dark of her quiet house, she sipped the wine at last and let her mind settle on the one detail she could not explain, the strange, snagging familiarity of his eyes. She pushed it away. It was nothing. He was just another proud man who would now do what proud men always did, which was come for her with everything he had. Let him, she thought, and set the glass down. Let him show me exactly who he is. He started the war at dawn. It was elegant at first. Tai-Jun did not move men or make threats. He moved money. He had spent his life learning the quiet arteries through which power actually flowed, and he went for them one by one. A shipping contractor who had worked with the Lioness's people for 15 years suddenly received an offer too large to refuse from a company no one had heard of the week before. A customs official who had looked the other way for the southern ports for a decade abruptly found himself transferred. A warehouse lease came up for renewal and was quietly, invisibly, bought out from beneath her. "He's clever," Nene admitted, 3 days in, laying the reports out across Deborah's desk. They were in the back office of a small, unremarkable restaurant in the Old Quarter, one of a dozen places Deborah used, none of them grand, all of them invisible. "He's not coming at us directly. He's pulling threads, trying to unravel the network from the edges where we won't notice fast enough." Deborah sat very still, reading. She had a way of going completely motionless when she was thinking, like a predator that has caught a scent and is deciding, without any hurry at all, exactly how to move. "He's good," she said finally. "He's better than the man who slapped me looked. That man was a fool. This man is dangerous." She tapped one of the reports. "He's also predictable. He thinks in straight lines. He thinks power is about taking ports, taking contracts, taking faces in front of crowds. He doesn't understand that the strongest thing you can ever do is let your enemy reach for something and have it not be there." "What do you want to do?" A slow smile. "I want to let him win. Small things. The contractor, the warehouse. Let him have them. Let him feel clever. Let him think he's unraveling us. And while he's busy congratulating himself on pulling threads I didn't need anyway." She set down the page. "I'll take the loom." What followed over the next 2 weeks was a lesson in why the Lioness was the Lioness. Every move Tai-Jun made, she had not only anticipated, but prepared for, sometimes years in advance. The shipping contractor he had so expensively poached turned out to have been quietly cut out of her real operations 18 months earlier. Tai-Jun had paid a fortune for a man who knew nothing of value. The customs official's replacement was, it emerged, already loyal to her. And while Tai-Jun spent his energy, and his name, and his money, buying up the edges of an empire, Deborah moved against the center of his. She did not touch his ports. She touched his people. A trusted associate in his own organization, a man Tai-Jun had relied on for years, received a visit, not a threat. Never a threat. Just a conversation. Just a quiet laying out of facts and futures, and an offer of a better one. She did not buy the man's loyalty. She showed him gently that it had never really been bought in the first place, only rented, and that the lease was up. Within a week, Tae-Jun's own information was flowing, clean and complete, across Deborah's desk. He did not realize it for nearly 10 days. And when he did, when the pattern finally became clear, when he understood that every single move he had made had been not just countered, but used, that she had taken his aggression and folded it back against him like a man folding paper, that for 2 full weeks, the famous Kang Tae-Jun had been 3 steps behind a woman he dismissed as a ghost. The rage that took him was unlike anything he had felt in his life. It was in that rage that he made the mistake. Up to this point, the war had been clean. Money and influence and information. No one had been hurt. It was the unspoken rule of the truce, the line that even enemies did not cross at a summit's negotiating table. You moved against power, not against blood. But Tae-Jun, humiliated for the 3rd time, 3 steps behind. His pride flayed open, gave an order in anger that he should never have given. He ordered his men to move against one of Deborah's warehouses while it was occupied, to send a message, to finally make her feel something, to remind her that beneath all her cleverness, there was still a body that could bleed. He did not know that the warehouse held more than cargo that night. He did not know that a dozen of her people were inside. He did not know, because he had stopped thinking, because rage had eaten his judgment the way it had eaten it at the summit, that he had just turned a war of pride into a war of blood. And in the back office of a small, unremarkable restaurant in the old quarter, when the call came in, Deborah went very, very still. She listened. She set the phone down. And when she looked up at Nene, the calm in her face was not the calm of a woman who is at peace. It was the calm of a woman who has just decided something terrible. He crossed it, she said softly. He actually crossed it. Are our people? They're alive, barely. He didn't mean to take it that far. I can see that even now, even from here. He's a child who threw a stone and is only now hearing the glass break. Her hands were perfectly steady. But it doesn't matter what he meant. It matters what he did. And what he did, Nene, was hand me the right to end him completely. Tonight. No one on this coast would lift a finger to stop me. They'd thank me. Nene waited. Outside the small window, the harbor lights burned. So we end him. Deborah rose slowly from her chair. She walked to the window and looked out at the water, at the scattered coins of light. And for a long moment, she said nothing at all. Because the truth she had not said aloud to anyone, the truth that had been sitting in her chest like a stone since the moment she'd looked down at his stunned face on that marble floor, was that there was something about Kang Tae-Jun's eyes that she had seen somewhere before, a long time ago, in a different life, on a night she had spent a great deal of effort trying never to remember. She just couldn't place it yet. No, she said finally. We don't end him. Nene's head turned sharply. Deborah. Not yet. She watched the dark water. I want to look him in the face first. I want to know if there's anything behind those eyes worth the trouble of leaving alive, or if I'm about to do the easiest thing I've ever done. She turned from the window, and her expression was unreadable. Bring him to me. Not his men. Not his money. Him. Tell him the lioness wants to finish their conversation. And tell him the faintest, coldest smile. Tell him to wear something he doesn't mind getting dirty. And so the trap was set, not with violence, but with an invitation that no man who had been humiliated 3 times could possibly refuse. Tae-Jun would come. His pride would not let him do anything else, He would walk, of his own free will, into the hands of the one person on the coast with every reason and every right to destroy him. And he would have no idea that the woman waiting for him had already, against every instinct she owned, decided to spare his life for reasons she did not yet understand. Because there was something about his eyes, something she had seen before, on a night 15 years gone, in a different life, that she had spent every day since trying to forget. He came alone, the way she had asked. That alone told Deborah something. A proud man, a frightened man, a stupid man. Any of them would have brought guns, brought men, brought something to hide behind. But Kang Tai-jun walked into the dim, empty warehouse on the edge of the southern docks, with nothing but the clothes on his back, exactly as she'd instructed, wearing an old dark coat that he clearly did not mind getting dirty. He understood what kind of invitation this was. He had come anyway. The space was vast and shadowed, lit by a single hanging bulb that threw a pool of yellow light onto the concrete floor. Deborah stood at the edge of that light, and beyond her, half swallowed by darkness, stood a dozen of her people, silent, still, watching. Tae-jun's footsteps echoed as he crossed the floor and stopped at the far side of the light, and for a long moment, the two of them simply looked at each other across it. "You came," she said. "You knew I would. I knew your pride would." Her voice was quiet, even. "That's not the same thing as you. I wanted to see which one walked through the door." His jaw tightened. He was a man unused to being read so plainly, and even less used to standing in a room where he was not the most powerful person in it. "You wanted to see me on my knees," he said. "So let's not pretend. You have your people. You have your warehouse. You have every reason and every right. My men are not here. I am not armed. So do whatever it is you brought me here to do. You think I brought you here to kill you? I think you'd be a fool not to." He said it flatly, almost daring her. "I came into your house. I struck you in front of 300 people. I called you trash. And then, when you made me look like a child, I sent men to your warehouse, and people of yours got hurt. On this coast, men have been buried for far less. You have the right. So take it." And here, Deborah did something he did not expect. She stepped forward into the full pool of light, so he could see her face completely. Not the plain assistant from the summit, not the legend the whole coast whispered about, but simply a woman, looking at him with an expression he could not name. "You're right," she said. "I have the right. No one would stop me. They'd thank me." She tilted her head. "Do you know why you're still breathing, Kang Tae-jun? Tell me." "Because of your eyes." He frowned. Whatever he had been braced for, it wasn't that. "My eyes. There's something in them I've seen before." She studied him the way she studied everything. Slowly, completely, missing nothing. "I couldn't place it at the summit. I told myself it was nothing. But I don't believe in nothing. I've stayed alive this long by never once believing in nothing." She circled him slowly, and he held still, every nerve in his body screaming at the proximity of a dozen armed strangers and the woman who commanded them. "So before I decide what to do with you, I want one honest thing. Just one. And if you lie to me, I'll know. And then this conversation ends in the only other way it can. Ask, why are you really here, on this coast, crossing an ocean for ports you don't need, and money you already have?" Her voice dropped. "Men like your father send sons to take territory. But you didn't come for territory. I've watched you for 3 weeks now. You came for something else. What was it?" The question hung in the yellow light. And Tai-jun, who had spent his whole life answering questions with whatever served him best, who had never once in his adult life told a powerful person an inconvenient truth, found, to his own astonishment, that he could not lie to her. Not with her eyes on him like that. Not in this room. "To matter," he said. The words came out rougher than he intended. He looked away from her, at the shadows, at the watching faces. "My father built everything. Every name, every route, every fortune, his. I have spent 40 years being the son of the man who matters. They obey me because of his name. They fear me because of his name. At the summit, when they parted for me, do you know what I thought? I thought, finally, this is mine. This fear belongs to me." A bitter sound, not quite a laugh. And then a woman in flat shoes put me on the floor in front of all of them, and I understood that even my fear was borrowed, that I had nothing of my own, not even that. The warehouse was very quiet. Deborah had stopped circling. She stood before him, and the unreadable thing in her face had shifted into something closer to recognition. "That," she said softly, "is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 10 years. And then she rolled back the sleeve of her left arm. He did not understand at first why she was doing it. And then he saw it. The mark on the inside of her wrist, pale and old, a long, thin scar with a strange branching shape to it, like a fork of lightning burned into the skin. And something cold and electric moved through Kang Tae-jun's body, because he had seen that mark before. Not the scar. The shape. He had seen that exact shape once, 15 years ago, on the worst night of his young life, illuminated for a single instant by fire. "No," he said quietly. "You were 19, Deborah said. It was a building near the Eastern Harbor. Your father had sent you to prove yourself, and you'd walked into something far bigger than you. And by the time the shooting started and the fire caught, you were trapped on the 3rd floor with a bullet in your side and no way down." Her voice was steady, but something old and deep moved beneath it. "You'd given up. You were sitting against the wall waiting to die. And a stranger came through the smoke and pulled you out a corridor that wasn't on any plan and got you down to the street and disappeared before you could see her face." She held up the wrist, the lightning scar pale in the yellow light. "You grabbed her arm on the way down, hard enough to mark her. She burned it on a pipe, getting you clear, and your grip set the shape of it. She never told anyone. She never asked for anything. She just walked back into the smoke to get the next one." Tae-jun was staring at the scar as though it were the only thing in the world. His face had gone bloodless. "That was you," he whispered. "That was... all these years I tried to... I know you did. A flicker of something almost gentle. I made sure you never could. Why? Because the boy I pulled out of that fire was worth saving." She lowered her arms slowly. "And then, 15 years later, that boy walked into a summit, slapped me across the face, called me trash, and told me to clean his suit." Her eyes found his and held them. "So you understand my difficulty, Kang Tae-jun. I have spent 3 weeks at war with the only man whose life I ever went out of my way to save. And I cannot for the life of me decide whether saving you was the best thing I ever did or the greatest mistake." The silence that followed was enormous. Tae-jun's legs would not quite hold him. He reached out and gripped the back of a crate to stay upright. Every cruel thing he had said to her at that summit was replaying in his head, but now overlaid with smoke and fire and the memory of a hand pulling him up off a floor he had been ready to die on. The woman he had struck, the woman he had called trash, the woman he had sent men to hurt. She had carried him out of the fire that nearly killed him and asked for nothing, not even to be known. "I didn't know," he said. It was barely a voice. "If I had known..." "That's the point." She cut him off, but not unkindly. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them like they matter. That's the whole lesson, and it's the one you've spent your life refusing to learn. You only see people once you find out they're powerful. A nobody in a plain dress could be the woman who saved your life, and you'd never know, because you stopped looking the moment you decided she was beneath you. She stepped back, out of the light. Go home, Kang Tae-jun. He blinked. You're letting me go. I'm letting you go. She was already turning away. The debt is paid. I saved your life once. I'm sparing it now. We're even. After tonight, stay off my coast and out of my way, and we never have to see each other again. That's mercy. Take it before I remember all the reasons I shouldn't be offering it. And she walked into the dark, and her people melted away after her, and Kang Tae-jun was left standing alone in the pool of yellow light, with the ruins of everything he'd believed about himself scattered at his feet. He did not stay off her coast. That was the first thing that surprised her. A man like that, given mercy, should have taken it and run. Should have crawled back across the ocean to lick his wounds and rebuild his pride somewhere it hadn't been so thoroughly destroyed. Instead, 3 days later, Deborah received word that Kang Tae-jun had begun quietly, methodically, undoing the war. The contractor he'd poached was returned, with an apology and a sum of money that made the man's eyes water. The customs official was restored. The warehouse lease he'd bought out from under her was signed back over, free and clear. And the men who had moved against her warehouse, the ones who had hurt her people, were not protected, not buried, not spirited out of the country. They were handed over to her with a single handwritten note. Whatever they owe, I owe it twice. Do what you think is right. It's a trick, Nena said. It has to be a trick. Maybe. Deborah turned the note over in her fingers. Or maybe a man who spent his whole life borrowing other people's power just found out what it feels like to be seen. That does strange things to a person. She set the note down. Watch him. But don't touch him. I want to see how far this goes. It went further than she imagined. The thing about a man's reputation in their world was that it was the only true currency, and Kang Tae-jun proceeded to spend his. At a gathering of the families 2 weeks later, a smaller council, but every name that mattered was in the room, he did something no one on the coast had ever seen a man of his standing do. He stood up in front of all of them, and he told the truth. You all know what happened at the summit, he said, and the room went still, because no one expected him to raise it himself. You laughed at me. You were right to. I came onto another family's territory, and I struck their leader across the face because I assumed she was nothing. I was wrong, not because she turned out to be powerful, though she did. I was wrong because it should never have mattered whether she was powerful or not. I treated a person like garbage because of how she looked, and I would have kept treating her that way if she hadn't put me on the floor. He let that sit. I am telling you this myself, because I would rather you hear it from me than whisper it behind me. I was arrogant. I've been arrogant my whole life. I am trying to stop. It was, in their world, a kind of suicide. Men did not admit weakness in front of rivals. Weakness was blood in the water. And for a moment, the room waited for the sharks. But something strange happened instead. The respect that Kang Tae-jun had failed to win through fear, he won in that moment, through the one thing none of them had the courage to offer: honesty at his own expense. It did not make them love him, but it made them watch him differently. Word of it reached Deborah within the hour. He stood up in front of the Okafors and the Russians and the whole council, Nene reported, something like disbelief in her voice. And he told them he was wrong, about you, about all of it. He didn't have to. No one made him. Deborah said nothing for a long moment. She was standing at the tall windows of her quiet mansion again, the wine untouched at her side, and the snagging familiarity in his eyes had finally, fully resolved into the memory of fire, and into something else now, something newer, that she did not have a name for and did not entirely welcome. "He's not doing it to win me back," she said. "He knows there's nothing to win. I told him to stay off my coast." "Then why?" "Because he means it." She turned from the glass. "That's the part I didn't account for. I expected him to be sorry he got caught. I expected him to be sorry he lost. I never expected him to actually understand what he did." A long breath. "That's a much more dangerous man, Nene. A proud man you can predict, but a proud man who has decided to change. There's no telling what a thing like that will do." What he did, over the weeks that followed, was wear her down, not through grand gestures, but through 100 small, relentless, undeniable acts of a man proving himself. When a rival family tried to move on one of her routes, Kang Tae-jun's people quietly closed ranks around it, before hers even arrived, and asked for nothing in return. When a shipment of hers was threatened by a corrupt port authority, the threat evaporated overnight, and she learned later it was because he had spent a great deal of his own money and more of his own leverage to make it disappear. He never mentioned any of it. He never sent a note again. He simply, steadily, made himself useful to her interests at cost to his own, and asked for nothing, and waited. And against every instinct she had spent a lifetime sharpening, Deborah began to find herself looking for him. It frightened her. She was not a woman who was frightened easily, but she recognized the feeling for what it was, the slow, treacherous warmth of attraction taking root and ground. She had kept salted and barren on purpose for 20 years. She had built her entire life on the principle that she needed no one, that warmth was a weakness her enemies could pry open, that the lioness walked alone. And now there was a man on the edges of her world who had been her enemy a month ago, who had struck her, whom she had every reason to despise, and her eyes kept finding him across rooms, and her chest did something complicated when they did. "You're letting him close," Nene observed one evening, carefully, in the way of someone who had earned the right to say dangerous things. "I'm watching him close. There's a difference." "There used to be." Nene didn't smile. "Be careful, Deborah. We don't know everything about him yet. Men who change that fast sometimes change back." It was good advice. It was the advice Deborah would have given anyone, and it would prove, within days, to be exactly the wrong fear aimed at exactly the wrong man, because the danger, when it finally came, did not come from Kang Tae-jun at all. It came from inside her own house. His name was Tobias, and he had been with Deborah for 9 years, and she trusted him as much as she trusted anyone outside Nene. He ran the inland routes, knew the network's quiet places, held a dozen secrets that could unmake her if they ever got loose. And he had decided, somewhere in the long shadow of her power, that he was tired of being a lieutenant in someone else's empire, when he could be a king in the ruins of it. The war with Tae-jun had given him his opening. For weeks, while Deborah's attention was turned outward toward the Korean, Tobias had been quietly turning her own network against her from within, feeding information to a rival family in the north, the Volkovs, in exchange for a promise of the southern ports once Deborah was gone. He had spent his 9 years of trust building a knife, and now he meant to use it. The strike came at the Old Quarter restaurant, the place Deborah believed was invisible, the place only her most trusted people knew, which was exactly why it worked. She was in the back office with Nene, going over the week's reports, when the front of the building erupted, the doors blown inward, armed men pouring through. Volkov men, far more than the 2 women and the handful of guards could hold. It was a slaughter, built to look like a war casualty. The lioness, caught in the crossfire of her own messy conflict with the Korean upstart. Clean. Deniable. Tobias's plan, executed to the letter. Deborah had her gun out before the smoke cleared, had dropped 2 men before the first guard fell. But the math was brutal, and she knew it. And so did Nena, who took a round through the shoulder and went down hard behind the desk. They were pinned. They were outnumbered. And in the half-second of relative quiet, as the attackers regrouped to push into the back, Deborah looked at the wounded woman beside her and understood, with the cold clarity she'd carried her whole life, that this was very likely the room she was going to die in. And then the back wall came apart. Not the front, the back. The wall behind the attackers, the loading entrance, blown open in a roar of noise and dust, and through it came men, but not Volkov men. Tae-Jun's men. And at the front of them, moving fast and low through the smoke with a gun in his hand, and absolutely no hesitation in his body, was Kang Tae-Jun himself. What happened next happened in under 90 seconds, and Deborah, who had seen a great deal of violence in her life, would remember it for the rest of hers. He hit them from behind, where they were soft, where they were not expecting it, and he did it not like a man protecting an investment, but like a man who had decided something and was no longer capable of deciding otherwise. He put himself between the attackers and the back office. He took a round across the ribs and did not stop. He cleared the room with a brutal, focused efficiency that had nothing of the preening Summit peacock in it, and everything of a man who had once been pulled out of a fire and had spent 15 years not knowing how to repay it. When it was over, when the last Volkov man was down, and the dust hung gold in the broken light, and Nene was bleeding but breathing, and the impossible silence of after had fallen, Deborah came out from behind the desk and found Kang Tae-Jun leaning against the ruined doorframe with a hand pressed to his bleeding side, looking at her. "How did you know?" she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "No one knew about this place. No one." "I didn't know about the place." He winced, pressing harder against the wound. "I knew about Tobias. My people picked up the Volkov contact 3 days ago. I've been trying to get a message to you for 2 days, but he was intercepting everything that came through your inland routes. He'd have known I'd warned you." A grim half-smile. "So I stopped trying to warn you and just had my men follow him instead. He led us here." He looked around at the wreckage. "I got here as fast as I could. I wasn't sure I'd be in time." Deborah crossed the room slowly. She stood in front of him, this man she had pulled from a fire and gone to war with and spared and watched, and she looked at the blood on his side, at the steadiness in his eyes, at the fact that he had crossed a city and taken a bullet to stand between her and death, asking for nothing, exactly as he had done everything else these past weeks. "You could have let it happen," she said quietly. "If I die, your war's over. Your humiliation goes with me. The story everyone tells. It dies in this room. You'd have been free of all of it." Her eyes searched his. "Why? You know why. Say it." And Kang Tae-Jun, bleeding against a broken doorframe, having finally found a way to repay a debt 15 years old, looked at the most powerful and most dangerous and, he had come to understand, most extraordinary woman he had ever known, and he said it. "Because the night you pulled me out of that fire, you didn't know who I was, and you saved me anyway. And I've spent 15 years becoming the kind of man who would have left you in this room to save himself." His voice was rough. "I don't want to be that man anymore. I'd rather bleed out in this doorway than go back to being him. So that's why, Deborah, because you taught me what it costs to be worth saving. And I'm trying. I'm finally trying." For a long moment she said nothing. And then she did something the lioness had not done in front of another living soul in longer than she could remember. She let the wall down. "You're an idiot," she said softly, and there was something wet at the edge of her voice, and something that was almost a laugh. "You're bleeding all over my restaurant. It's a terrible restaurant. The food is bad on purpose, isn't it? So no one stays." A real laugh broke out of her, startled and helpless. "Yes," she admitted, "the food is bad on purpose. I knew it." And then his legs began to go, and she caught him, this enormous, proud, broken, changing man, and lowered him to the floor with her arms around him, and held pressure to his wound with hands that had ended more lives than she could count. And for the first time in 20 years, the lioness held on to someone instead of letting go. The reckoning with Tobias came 3 nights later, and it was, in the end, brief. He had run, of course, the moment he understood the strike had failed, run north toward the Volkovs and the protection he believed they'd give him. But the Volkovs did not protect failed weapons. They discarded them. And so when Deborah's people finally cornered Tobias, he had no army and no allies, and no king's crown waiting in any ruins, only a borrowed room in a cold city, and the slow understanding that 9 years of trust had bought him nothing but a debt now coming due. She went to him herself. She brought Tae-jun, still moving carefully from the half-healed wound across his ribs, because some part of her had decided she no longer wanted to walk into the hardest rooms alone. And she stood in front of the man who had tried to murder her in her own house, and she did not gloat, and she did not rage. She simply looked at him for a long, quiet moment, the way she looked at everything. 9 years, she said. I would have given you the inland routes outright if you'd asked. You knew that. You knew the kind of woman I am. I don't hoard. I build. And I share what I build with the people who help me build it. She tilted her head. So, it was never about the roots, was it? It was about not wanting to need anyone above you. About hating that the empire had a name, and the name wasn't yours. A faint, sad recognition. I understand it better than you'd think, Tobias. I spent my whole life around men who'd rather burn a thing down than admit they didn't build it. I just never thought you were one of them. You don't understand anything, Tobias spat. You stand up there, the great lioness, humble in your plain dresses, and you think it makes you better than the rest of us. It's just another way of being above everyone. The humblest person in the room is still the one everyone's watching. Deborah considered that. Maybe, she said. But there's a difference between the humility that's a performance and the humility that's a debt you're still paying. She glanced, just briefly, at Tae-jun beside her. I came from nothing. From less than nothing. Everything I have, because somewhere along the way people chose to lift me when they didn't have to. I stay low because I remember the floor. You never knew the floor, Tobias. That's the real difference between us. You only ever knew the climbing. She did not kill him. That surprised the people who'd come expecting blood. She broke him instead. Broke his network, broke his leverage, broke every secret he'd thought he could sell. And then she let him live in a world where he had nothing left to sell and no one left who feared him, which for a man like Tobias was a far heavier sentence than dying. The Volkovs, learning their conspiracy had collapsed, and their name was now exposed to every family on the coast, found themselves frozen out of the southern trade entirely, punished not by violence, but by the slow, total, suffocating withdrawal of a coast that had decided it would no longer do business with people who struck at the lioness in the dark. It was, the families would later agree, the most complete and the most quiet destruction of an enemy any of them had ever witnessed. She had not raised an army. She had simply, with Tae-jun at her side, let her enemies' own choices close over their heads like dark water. And when it was finished, when the threat was gone and the coast was steadier than it had been in years, and the story everyone now told was not of the night. The Korean was humiliated, but of the night the lioness and the changed man stood together and took down the traitor in her own house. Deborah and Tae-jun found themselves, late one evening, back at her quiet mansion, on the wide stone terrace above the dark water, with a bottle of wine between them that for once she actually drank. "You're not going back across the ocean?" she said. It was not quite a question. "No." He looked out at the harbor lights, the scattered coins of gold on black. "My father wants me to. He says I've gone soft. He says the coast has made me weak." A small, genuine smile. I told him the coast made me honest, and that honest and weak are not the same thing, no matter how many men like him spend their lives pretending they are. He turned to her. "I'm staying, Deborah, if you'll have me near. Not as a rival. Not even, necessarily, as—" He hesitated, the proud man suddenly and endearingly unsure. "As anything you don't want. Just near. I've spent my whole life borrowing power. I'd rather spend the rest of it next to someone who actually has it and never once needed to borrow." Deborah looked at him for a long time in the low golden light, at the tattoos on his neck, the half-healed wound he'd taken for her, the eyes she'd finally placed. Eyes she had seen through smoke and fire 15 years ago, the eyes of a boy she'd decided was worth saving, the eyes of a man who had finally become worth the saving. "When I pulled you out of that fire," she said quietly, "do you know what I thought, looking at you on the street before I went back in? I thought, that one's going to grow up to be a monster. I could see it in you even then. The pride, the hunger. I almost left you. I want you to know that. For 1 second, I almost decided the world was better off." She reached out slowly and touched the side of his face, the proud face, the changed face. "I'm glad I was wrong. It took you 15 years and a slap and a war and a bullet. But you proved me wrong, Kang Tae-jun. Do you have any idea how few people ever have?" "Then have me near," he said, very low. And the lioness, who walked alone, who needed no one, who had kept the ground around her heart salted and barren for 20 long years, leaned in and let one thing grow there at last. "I think," she murmured against him, "that I already do." They were not soft after that. People who expected the lioness to soften did not understand her at all. She did not soften. She simply, finally, stopped being alone. The empire grew stronger with 2 minds behind it, instead of one. Her depth and his daring, her patience and his fire. A partnership the coast learned quickly to respect, and enemies learned faster to fear. He never tried to stand in front of her. He had learned, in the hardest way, a man can learn anything, exactly what it cost to mistake a woman like her for something to stand in front of. And she never tried to dim herself for him. She had spent too long becoming exactly who she was to shrink an inch of it now. The proposal came on a night that started like any other and ended like nothing she had ever known. He did not do it the way a borrowing man would have done it, not with a crowd to witness it, not with a spectacle to announce it, not with anything designed to be seen. He did it the way she had taught him, without knowing she was teaching him, on the same wide stone terrace above the dark water where she had first let the wall down. He took her left hand and turned it over, and traced the old lightning scar on the inside of her wrist with his thumb. The mark he had made 15 years ago, gripping the arm of a stranger who was carrying him out of the fire. "This mark," he said quietly, "is the first thing I ever gave you. I didn't mean to. I was a boy who was sure he was about to die, holding on to the only thing that felt solid." He lifted her wrist and pressed his lips to the scar. Let me give you something on purpose this time." When he opened his hand, there was no enormous stone in it, nothing that begged to be noticed, only a simple, perfect band, the most expensive kind of plane, exactly the kind of thing she would have chosen for herself. Deborah, who had stared down armed men without her pulse changing, found that her hands were not quite steady. "You crossed an ocean to take everything I had," she said softly. "I know. And now you want to spend your life giving it back. For the rest of it," his voice was rough and certain. "Marry me, Deborah. Not the lioness, not the empire. You, the woman who went back into the fire for the next one. Marry me, and I'll spend every year I have left proving you were right, not to leave that boy on the street." She looked at him for a long moment in the low golden light. And then the lioness, who walked alone, who needed no one, did the bravest thing she had ever done, which was to need someone on purpose. "Yes," she said, "on one condition." A faint, dangerous smile touched her mouth. "Never make me clean your suit." His laugh broke out of him, helpless and full, and he pulled her in, and the dark water crashed far below them, and for once, neither of them was watching the doors. The wedding was small and quiet, and the most powerful gathering the coast had seen in a generation. There was no spectacle. Deborah would never have allowed a spectacle. But every name that mattered came, not out of fear, and not out of obligation, but out of something rarer in their world: respect, freely given, to two people who had earned it the hard way. The Okafors came. The families who had laughed at Kang Tae-jun on the worst night of his life came, and watched him stand beside the woman who had put him on that floor, and understood that they were not watching a man tamed, but a man completed. Nene stood at Deborah's side, her shoulder long healed, and when she looked at the woman she had followed for 15 years, finally allowing herself one moment of pure, undefended happiness, even the severe and unsentimental Nina had to look away to the water for a moment. Deborah wore no jewels and no gold. She wore a deep, rich gown the color of pure white, and her hair was crowned simply, and she looked, everyone agreed, like exactly what she was. Not a woman trying to look like a queen, but a queen who had never once needed to try. Tae-jun could not stop looking at her. He had spent his life in rooms full of people performing power, and here, at last, was the real thing, and it had chosen him. "You're staring," she murmured as they stood together. "I'm allowed now," he said. "It's in the vows." But peace, in their world, is never a gift. It is only ever a loan, and there were those who had been waiting a long time to call it in. The rival syndicates had watched the marriage of the two empires with growing dread. Apart, the lioness and the Korean had been formidable. Together, they were something no one on the coast could stand against alone, and so the ones who feared them did the only thing frightened, powerful men ever do. They stopped being rivals to each other and became, for one night, allies against the thing they feared more. 3 syndicates, the remnants of the Volkovs, hungry for the revenge that had been denied them. The Castellano family from the eastern ports, who had long resented a coast that bowed to a woman. And a cold, patient northern outfit that had stayed out of every conflict precisely so it would be standing when the others had bled each other thin. They pooled their men and their money and their hatred, and they came for Deborah and Tae-jun on their own ground, believing that the surest way to break 2 empires was to strike before the honeymoon was even cold. They believed, as so many had believed before them, that they were moving against people who would not see them coming. They were wrong, of course. They were always wrong about her. Deborah had felt the shift in the coast for weeks, the 2 quiet rivals, the meetings that broke up the moment she was mentioned, the careful way certain men had stopped meeting her eyes. She had survived 20 years by believing in nothing and noticing everything, and she had laid her own quiet preparations the way she always did, long before the first shot was ever fired. "They think we're soft now," Tae-jun said, the night the news finally broke into the open, studying the map of the coast spread across her desk. There was no fear in him. There was something better, the steadiness of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for that wasn't his own pride. Married, distracted, off our guard. They think love made us weak. Deborah's eyes moved across the map, cold and clear and 3 steps ahead, as they had always been. Let them. It's the last useful mistake they'll ever make. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she did not lay her plan out to Nene or to her people. She laid it out to her husband, and they built the answer together. Her depth and his daring, her patience and his fire. 2 minds that had spent a month learning to move as one. They've made themselves into one target by joining up, she said. 3 heads, 1 body. So we don't chase 3 syndicates across the coast. We cut off all 3 heads in a single night, in a single room, and we let the body fall on its own. What followed was not a war. It was an execution of a plan so precise that the families would speak of it for a generation. The 3 syndicates, certain they were luring the newlyweds into a trap, walked instead into one, drawn to a summit of their own arrogance, exactly the way Tae-jun himself had once been drawn across an ocean by his pride. When the doors closed that night, it was Deborah's people who held them, and Tae-jun's who waited beyond, and the 3 frightened powers who had banded together discovered that the thing they feared most had simply let them gather themselves into one place so it would not have to hunt them one by one. Tae-jun fought at her back, and she at his, and they moved through that long night, not as 2 empires, but as one. He had learned, in the hardest way a man can learn anything, never to stand in front of her. So he stood beside her, where she had room to be exactly as dangerous as she was. The Castellanos broke first, then the Volkovs, their second attempt at her life ending far more completely than their first. The cold northern outfit, watching their allies fall, tried to do what they did best and slip away to wait for a better night, and found, with dawning horror, that Deborah had closed that door years ago before they had ever thought to open it. By morning, 3 syndicates that had ruled corners of the coast for decades simply did not exist anymore. Not destroyed in fire and noise, unmade, quietly, totally, the way she unmade everything. Their men scattered, their leaders broken, their territories absorbed into an empire that now had 2 names at its head and no rivals left standing who dared to test it. And when it was over, when the dust had settled and the coast was steadier and safer than it had been in living memory, Deborah and Kang Tae-jun stood together once more on the wide stone terrace above the dark water, bruised, exhausted, alive, and married, the rings on, their hands catching the first gold of the morning. He took her left hand, the way he always would, and turned it over, and traced the old lightning scar on the inside of her wrist with his thumb. The mark had been a wound, and then a secret, and then a debt. And now it was simply the place where their 2 stories had first touched, long before either of them knew the other's name. The boy she had nearly left in the fire had grown into the man who took a bullet to keep her out of one, and then stood at her back to keep 3 armies from her door. So here is what this story leaves us with, besties. The world will always look at the quiet ones and decide they are nothing. It will look at a plain dress and see weakness. It will look at a soft voice and hear nothing worth fearing. It will mistake humility for smallness and kindness for an opening and silence for an invitation to strike. And it will be wrong every single time. Because real power has never once needed to announce itself. And the strongest person in any room is almost never the loudest. Deborah was underestimated her entire life, and she turned that into the sharpest weapon she ever owned. But the deeper lesson is the one Kang Tae-jun had to bleed to learn. That the true measure of who you are is not how you treat the people you fear, but how you treat the people you believe can do nothing for you at all. He treated a stranger like garbage, and she turned out to be the woman who had carried him out of the fire. We are all, every day, standing in front of someone we have decided is nothing. May we be wiser than he was before life has to teach us the hard way. So tell me, besties, if you were in Deborah's shoes that night at the summit, and the most feared man on the coast slapped you in front of 300 people, would you have done what she did and fought back? Or would you have walked away and let him wonder forever who he'd just made an enemy of? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, besties, then you're exactly the kind of person this story was made for. So do me a favor and hit that like button. Drop a comment and tell me what you'd have done in Deborah's shoes. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Afrohan Tales so you never miss a story like this one.